The grand ballroom of Valdoria Palace sparkled under the light of 1,000 crystal chandeliers as nobles from across the kingdom gathered for Queen Isabella's birthday celebration. Lady Cordelia Ashworth, once considered the most elegant woman in the royal court, stood near the marble pillars watching the festivities with growing bitterness in her heart. Her emerald gown, though still magnificent, could not hide the anger that had been building inside her for months. Cordelia had once been Queen Isabella's closest confidant, sharing secrets over afternoon tea and walking together through the palace gardens. But everything changed when Prince Alexander announced his engagement to Lady Victoria Sterling, a woman Cordelia believed was beneath her station. Cordelia had harbored secret feelings for the prince for years, convinced that their childhood friendship would eventually blossom into something more meaningful. The betrayal cut deeper, because Queen Isabella had encouraged the match between Alexander and Victoria. During private conversations, the Queen had praised Victoria's kindness and intelligence, qualities that Cordelia felt were merely common politeness disguised as virtue. The final insult came when Queen Isabella appointed Victoria as the new Duchess of Ravenshire, a title that Cordelia had expected to receive. As the evening progressed, Cordelia consumed glass after glass of wine, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crumble. She watched Victoria dance gracefully with Prince Alexander, their happiness seeming to mock her own loneliness. The other nobles whispered behind their fans, some expressing sympathy for Cordelia's obvious distress, while others gossiped about her increasingly erratic behavior in recent weeks. When Queen Isabella approached to check on her former friend, Cordelia's anger finally boiled over. The years of perceived slights, the crushing disappointment of unrequited love, and the public humiliation of being passed over for Victoria all merged into a moment of uncontrollable rage. Without thinking of consequences, Cordelia raised her hand and delivered a stinging slap across Queen Isabella's cheek. The ballroom fell silent. Musicians stopped playing mid-note. Dancers froze in place. Every eye turned toward the two women standing near the pillars, one holding her reddening cheek in shock, the other trembling with the magnitude of what she had just done. Captain Marcus Thorne of the Royal Guard, who had been stationed discreetly near the refreshment tables, immediately stepped forward. His hand moved to his sword hilt as he assessed the threat to his sovereign. The Queen, despite her shock, raised a hand to signal him to wait, but the damage was already done. Cordelia had committed an act of violence against the crown in front of hundreds of witnesses. The whispers began immediately spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Some nobles gasped in horror, while others leaned forward eagerly to witness what would happen next. Lady Victoria stopped dancing and moved closer to Prince Alexander, her face pale with concern for the Queen's safety and the implications of what everyone had witnessed. Queen Isabella, her voice steady despite the circumstances, spoke quietly to Cordelia. She asked what had driven her dear friend to such desperate action, but Cordelia's response was filled with accusations and bitter words about favoritism, betrayal, and the Queen's supposed cruelty in allowing others to take what Cordelia believed was rightfully hers. The confrontation escalated when Cordelia, emboldened by wine and rage, began speaking loudly about the Queen's failures as a ruler and her poor judgment in matters of the heart. She accused Queen Isabella of being manipulated by younger, prettier women who sought only power and position. Her words grew more venomous, attacking not only the Queen, but also Lady Victoria, and even Prince Alexander. Captain Thorne had heard enough. While the Queen might show mercy, he could not allow such disrespect to continue unchecked. The safety and dignity of the crown superseded any personal relationships or past friendships. He signaled to his men positioned around the ballroom, and they began moving closer to where Cordelia stood, still ranting about perceived injustices. The crowd watched in fascination and horror as the drama unfolded. Some of the older nobles remembered similar scenes from decades past, when court intrigue and personal vendettas had led to public confrontations. They understood that what they were witnessing would have consequences that reached far beyond this single evening. As Cordelia continued her tirade, her voice growing shriller with each accusation, she failed to notice the royal guards closing in around her. Her focus remained fixed on Queen Isabella, pouring out years of resentment and disappointment in a torrent of words that would seal her fate. Part 2. The morning after the disastrous ball. News of Lady Cordelia's arrest spread throughout the kingdom like a summer storm. She had been escorted from the palace in iron shackles, her emerald gown torn and stained, while curious onlookers gathered along the cobblestone streets to witness her fall from grace. The woman who had once been seen as the epitome of noble elegance now found herself confined in the Tower of Valdoria, the ancient fortress that housed the kingdom's most dangerous criminals. Cordelia's cell was a far cry from her luxurious chambers in the noble quarter. The stone walls were damp and cold, with only a small barred window providing a glimpse of the world she had lost. A simple wooden bed, a chamber pot, and a rough wooden table comprised her furnishings. The guards who brought her meager meals avoided eye contact, treating her with the detached professionalism reserved for prisoners of the crown. In the days following her imprisonment, Cordelia's family faced unprecedented shame. The Ashworth name, respected for generations, was now synonymous with treason and disgrace. Her elderly father, Duke Edmund Ashworth, suffered a collapse upon learning of his daughter's actions and had to be confined to bed under physician's care. Her younger brother, Sir Thomas Ashworth, found himself ostracized by his former friends and colleagues at court. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Lord Chancellor William Blackwood, the kingdom's highest judicial authority, announced that Lady Cordelia would face trial for high treason, assault upon the sovereign, and disturbing the peace. Each charge carried severe penalties, with treason potentially punishable by death. The announcement sent shockwaves through noble society, as many had expected Queen Isabella to show mercy to her former friend. Public opinion was divided. Common folk, who had long resented the privileges of nobility, saw Cordelia's downfall as proof that justice could reach even the highest ranks of society. They gathered in taverns and marketplaces, discussing the scandal with mixture of satisfaction and morbid curiosity. Some expressed sympathy for a woman driven to desperation by unrequited love, while others condemned her as a spoiled noble who deserved whatever punishment awaited her. The noble class found themselves in a more precarious position. Many had witnessed Cordelia's behavior firsthand and could not deny the severity of her actions, yet they worried about the precedent her harsh treatment might set. If Queen Isabella could order the imprisonment of a woman who had once been her closest friend, what protection did any of them have against royal displeasure? Inside her cell, Cordelia alternated between defiance and despair. During the day, she would pace the small confines of her prison, rehearsing arguments for her defense and plotting ways to expose what she perceived as the queen's unfairness. But in the darkness of night, when the weight of her situation fully settled upon her, she would weep quietly for the life she had destroyed with a single moment of uncontrolled anger. Her only visitor during this time was Father Benedict, the prison chaplain, who came to offer spiritual counsel and prepare her soul for whatever judgment awaited. The elderly priest had ministered to many condemned prisoners over the years and recognized the signs of a person struggling to accept responsibility for their actions. Cordelia insisted she was the victim of a conspiracy, that Queen Isabella had deliberately provoked her to provide an excuse for her removal from court. Meanwhile, preparations for the trial proceeded with meticulous attention to detail. Lord Chancellor Blackwood assembled a panel of the kingdom's most respected judges, ensuring that no one could later claim the proceedings were unfair or biased. Witnesses were interviewed, evidence was gathered, and legal precedents were researched to ensure that justice would be both swift and thorough. Queen Isabella herself struggled with the situation. Despite Cordelia's betrayal, memories of their friendship haunted her quiet moments. She remembered shared laughter, whispered confidences, and the genuine affection they had once felt for each other. Yet she also understood that mercy without justice would undermine the very foundations of royal authority. A sovereign who failed to punish attacks upon the crown would invite further rebellion and chaos. Prince Alexander and Lady Victoria postponed their wedding plans indefinitely, feeling that celebration would be inappropriate while the kingdom dealt with such turmoil. Victoria, in particular, felt partially responsible for Cordelia's breakdown, though she had done nothing more than accept the prince's proposal and the queen's offer of a title. The guilt weighed heavily upon her gentle heart, causing sleepless nights and loss of appetite. The legal team assigned to Cordelia's defense faced an impossible task. Sir Geoffrey Harrington, an experienced advocate known for his skill in defending hopeless cases, met with his client to discuss strategy. Cordelia's refusal to show remorse or acknowledge wrongdoing made mounting an effective defense extremely difficult. She insisted on maintaining her innocence and demanded that Queen Isabella be called to account for her alleged crimes against friendship and loyalty. As the trial date approached, security around the Tower of Valdoria was increased dramatically. Captain Thorne personally oversaw arrangements, fearing that Cordelia's supporters or enemies might attempt to interfere with the proceedings. The captain had served the crown faithfully for over 20 years, and had never before arrested someone of Cordelia's social standing, but duty required him to treat all threats to the monarchy with equal seriousness. The kingdom held its breath, waiting to see how this unprecedented crisis would resolve itself and what it might mean for the future relationship between the crown and the nobility. Part 3. The trial of Lady Cordelia Ashworth began on a gray October morning that seemed to mirror the somber mood of the kingdom. The Great Hall of Justice, normally reserved for the most significant legal proceedings, had been transformed into a courtroom befitting the magnitude of the case. Nobles, merchants, and common citizens packed the galleries, while guards maintained strict order among the restless crowd eager to witness this historic moment. Lord Chancellor Blackwood presided over the proceedings with the gravity befitting his office. His deep voice echoed through the chamber as he read the charges against Lady Cordelia, each word carrying the weight of centuries of legal tradition. The defendant sat in the prisoner's dock, her once perfect appearance now showing the effects of weeks in confinement. Her hair, no longer elaborately styled, hung simply around her shoulders, and her plain gray dress marked a stark contrast to the elegant gowns she had once worn. The prosecution, led by Sir Roland Ashcroft, the kingdom's most skilled legal advocate, presented their case with methodical precision. Witness after witness took the stand to describe the events of that fateful evening at the palace ball. Each testimony painted a picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and rage, whose attack upon the Queen had shocked and horrified all present. Captain Marcus Thorne provided particularly damaging testimony. His account of the evening was precise and professional, describing not only Cordelia's physical assault upon Queen Isabella, but also her continued verbal attacks against the crown. The captain's reputation for honesty and his years of faithful service lent credibility to every word he spoke, making it impossible for the defense to challenge his version of events. Lady Victoria Sterling, now officially the Duchess of Ravenshire, reluctantly took the witness stand when called upon by the prosecution. Her testimony was delivered with obvious reluctance, as she clearly felt no satisfaction in contributing to Cordelia's downfall. She described the defendant's increasingly hostile behavior in the weeks leading up to the ball, including several incidents where Cordelia had made cutting remarks about Victoria's background and suitability for noble rank. The defense strategy, such as it was, relied heavily on character witnesses who spoke of Cordelia's previous good standing in society and her charitable works among the poor. Several nobles testified to her former kindness and generosity, painting a picture of a woman driven to temporary madness by circumstances beyond her control. Sir Geoffrey Harrington argued passionately that his client's actions were the result of a broken heart and wounded pride rather than any real threat to the crown. However, Cordelia herself proved to be her own worst enemy. When called to testify in her own defense, she used the opportunity not to express remorse or ask for mercy, but to launch into another attack upon Queen Isabella's character and leadership. She accused the Queen of deliberate cruelty, of playing favorites among the nobility, and of lacking the wisdom necessary to rule effectively. Her words, delivered with passion but no sense of the gravity of her situation, sealed her fate in the minds of most observers. The defendant claimed that Queen Isabella had systematically excluded her from important court functions, had spread malicious rumors about her character, and had deliberately arranged Prince Alexander's engagement to Lady Victoria knowing it would cause Cordelia pain. She portrayed herself as the victim of elaborate conspiracy designed to destroy her reputation and drive her from court society. Queen Isabella herself was not called to testify, as royal protocol protected the sovereign from being subjected to cross-examination in legal proceedings. However, a written statement was read into the record, expressing the Queen's sorrow at the deterioration of her relationship with Lady Cordelia, while firmly maintaining that the defendant's actions could not be excused or overlooked. The trial lasted 3 days, during which the kingdom's attention remained fixed upon the proceedings. Public opinion gradually shifted against Cordelia as the evidence mounted, and her own testimony revealed the depth of her bitterness and lack of repentance. Even those who had initially felt sympathy for her plight began to see her as a dangerous individual whose unchecked emotions had led her to commit inexcusable acts. Expert witnesses testified about the serious nature of physical assault upon the monarch, explaining historical precedents and the legal principles that made such actions tantamount to treason. The prosecution argued that allowing Cordelia's crime to go unpunished would encourage others to believe they could attack the crown without consequences, potentially leading to chaos and rebellion throughout the kingdom. Sir Geoffrey made a final desperate plea for mercy, arguing that his client's noble birth and previous service to the realm should weigh in her favor. He pointed out that no lasting harm had been done to Queen Isabella, and that Cordelia's actions were clearly the result of emotional disturbance rather than calculated treason. He asked the court to consider exile or imprisonment rather than the death penalty that many expected. The judges deliberated for only 4 hours before returning their verdict. The Great Hall fell silent as Lord Chancellor Blackwood rose to announce their decision. The weight of history pressed down upon everyone present as they prepared to hear the fate of the woman who had once been one of the most prominent figures in noble society. Lady Cordelia stood to hear her fate with whatever dignity she could muster, finally seeming to understand that her former life was gone forever regardless of the court's decision. The nobles in attendance leaned forward anxiously, knowing that this moment would be remembered and discussed for generations to come. Part 4. The verdict rang out through the Great Hall like a death knell, guilty on all charges. Lady Cordelia Ashworth was found guilty of high treason, assault upon the sovereign, and disturbing the peace. The crowd's reaction was immediate and mixed. Gasps of shock, murmurs of satisfaction, and the rustle of fabric as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Cordelia herself remained standing, her face pale but composed, as Lord Chancellor Blackwood prepared to pronounce sentence. The sentence, when it came, surprised many who had expected the ultimate penalty. Instead of death, Cordelia was condemned to life imprisonment in the Tower of Valdoria, with all her titles, lands, and privileges stripped away permanently. She would be known simply as Prisoner 847, her noble name erased from official records. The mercy shown was attributed to Queen Isabella's intervention, though the Crown made no public statement confirming the speculation. The Ashworth family's disgrace was now complete. Duke Edmund, Cordelia's father, died 3 days after the verdict was announced, many believed from shame and heartbreak. The family's vast estates were confiscated by the Crown, their servants dismissed, and their ancestral home sealed pending disposition by royal decree. Sir Thomas Ashworth, Cordelia's brother, fled the kingdom in the dead of night, leaving behind only debts and the tattered remnants of the family honor. Captain Marcus Thorne supervised Cordelia's transfer to the tower's maximum security section, where she would spend the remainder of her days. The cell she was assigned was even smaller and more austere than her temporary quarters during the trial. A single candle was allowed each evening, and her meals consisted of bread, thin soup, and water, a stark contrast to the elaborate feasts she had once enjoyed at court. The kingdom's nobles watched these developments with a mixture of relief and unease. While justice had been served, the severity of Cordelia's punishment sent a clear message about the consequences of challenging royal authority. Many began to reconsider their own behavior and relationships with the crown, fearful that any perceived slight or disagreement might be interpreted as disloyalty. Queen Isabella found no satisfaction in her former friend's downfall. Private letters revealed her struggle with guilt and sorrow over the destruction of their relationship. She established a fund for the care of the Ashworth family's former servants and secretly ensured that Duke Edmund received proper burial in the family crypt, despite his daughter's disgrace. These acts of quiet compassion were not publicly acknowledged, but were noted by those close to the royal household. Prince Alexander and Lady Victoria finally celebrated their wedding 6 months after the trial concluded. The ceremony was deliberately modest compared to typical royal weddings, reflecting the couple's desire to avoid ostentatious displays while the kingdom was still processing recent events. Their marriage proved to be genuinely happy, based on mutual respect and affection rather than political convenience. In her cell, Cordelia's mental state began to deteriorate rapidly. The isolation, combined with the complete loss of everything she had valued in life, took a severe toll on her psychological well-being. She spent hours each day writing letters that would never be sent, composing elaborate plans for revenge that would never be implemented, and rehearsing conversations with Queen Isabella that would never take place. Father Benedict continued his regular visits, becoming perhaps the only person who still showed Cordelia any compassion. He reported to prison authorities that she exhibited signs of severe mental distress, including periods of complete silence followed by hours of animated conversation with invisible companions. Her appearance continued to decline as she lost interest in personal hygiene and proper nutrition. The broader implications of Cordelia's case extended far beyond her personal tragedy. Legal scholars debated the precedent set by her trial, particularly regarding the prosecution of nobles for crimes against the crown. Some argued that the harsh punishment was necessary to maintain royal authority, while others worried about the potential for abuse of power against political opponents. Social reformers used Cordelia's case to highlight the dangers of absolute monarchy and the need for legal protections for all citizens, regardless of their relationship with the crown. They pointed out that a system where personal displeasure from the monarch could result in life imprisonment was fundamentally unjust, regardless of the specific circumstances of this case. The incident also prompted discussions about the role of women in court society and the pressures they faced in competing for royal favor and advantageous marriages. Some observers noted that Cordelia's downfall reflected broader problems with a system that left women dependent on the goodwill of others for their security and status. Prison records from this period show that Cordelia made several attempts to contact Queen Isabella, writing pleading letters that were never delivered. In these documents, she alternately begged for forgiveness and renewed her accusations of betrayal, suggesting a mind unable to fully grasp the reality of her situation. Guards reported that she often spoke to herself, sometimes carrying on animated arguments with imaginary visitors. The Tower of Valdoria, previously known primarily as a military fortress, gained a new reputation as the prison where nobles who challenged the crown met their fate. Tourist guides began pointing out Cordelia's window to visitors, and her story became a cautionary tale told to young nobles about the importance of controlling their emotions and respecting royal authority. As months turned to years, the kingdom gradually moved beyond the scandal, though Cordelia's name remained synonymous with the consequences of unchecked ambition and jealousy. Her case became required study in legal schools and was frequently referenced in discussions about the relationship between individual rights and state security. Part 5. 3 years had passed since Lady Cordelia's imprisonment when disturbing reports began reaching the palace from the Tower of Valdoria. The once proud noblewoman had descended into complete madness, spending her days in animated conversations with imaginary visitors and her nights screaming accusations at invisible enemies. Prison physician Dr. Marcus Weatherby reported that she had lost significant weight, refused to maintain basic hygiene, and showed signs of severe psychological deterioration. Captain Thorne, now promoted to commander of the Royal Guard, regularly inspected the tower's facilities and became increasingly concerned about Cordelia's condition. During one visit, he found her huddled in a corner of her cell, weaving an elaborate crown from straw and scraps of cloth while muttering about her upcoming coronation as the rightful queen of Valdoria. Her delusions had grown so severe that she no longer recognized her own reflection in the small mirror provided for prisoners. The kingdom had moved forward during Cordelia's imprisonment. Queen Isabella had successfully navigated several diplomatic crises, implemented popular social reforms, and earned the genuine affection of her subjects. Prince Alexander and Princess Victoria had welcomed their first child, a daughter whose birth was celebrated throughout the realm. The royal family's happiness and stability stood in stark contrast to the tragic figure languishing in the tower. Public interest in Cordelia had largely faded, though occasional articles in the kingdom's newspapers reminded readers of her fate. Some progressive journalists began questioning whether lifelong imprisonment for a crime of passion was truly just, especially given the prisoner's obvious mental deterioration. These voices remained a minority, but they represented growing concerns about prison conditions and the treatment of mentally ill inmates. Father Benedict's visits became increasingly difficult as Cordelia's condition worsened. She would sometimes greet him as if he were Queen Isabella, begging for forgiveness one moment and hurling accusations the next. Other times she would mistake him for Prince Alexander and engage in elaborate conversations about their supposed secret romance. The elderly chaplain reported these incidents to prison authorities, recommending that Cordelia be transferred to a facility better equipped to handle mentally disturbed patients. Dr. Weatherby's medical reports painted a grim picture of progressive mental collapse. Cordelia exhibited symptoms of what would later be recognized as severe depression, paranoid delusions, and possible early dementia brought on by isolation and trauma. He noted that her physical health was also declining rapidly. with symptoms including chronic insomnia, loss of appetite, and recurring infections that her weakened immune system struggled to fight. Prison guards, initially sympathetic to their famous prisoner, gradually became disturbed by her increasingly erratic behavior. She would spend entire nights pacing her cell while delivering passionate speeches to empty walls, apparently addressing the royal court from her imagined throne. During the day, she would sit motionless for hours, staring at nothing while tears streamed down her face. A significant development occurred when Sir Thomas Ashworth, Cordelia's brother who had fled the kingdom, attempted to petition foreign courts for his sister's release. His efforts, conducted from exile in the neighboring kingdom of Astoria, argued that Cordelia's punishment was disproportionate to her crime and that her current mental state made continued imprisonment cruel and pointless. However, these diplomatic efforts were unsuccessful, as no foreign power was willing to interfere in Valdoria's internal justice system. Queen Isabella, despite maintaining public silence about Cordelia's fate, privately struggled with knowledge of her former friend's deteriorating condition. Royal physician Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, who had examined prison medical reports at the Queen's request, recommended that mercy might now be more appropriate than continued punishment. The Queen found herself torn between justice, mercy, and the political implications of either decision. The Royal Council was divided on the question of Cordelia's future. Some members argued that releasing a traitor, regardless of her mental state, would set a dangerous precedent and encourage others to feign madness to escape punishment. Others contended that keeping a clearly insane woman imprisoned served no purpose beyond cruelty and reflected poorly on the kingdom's reputation for justice and humanity. During this period, Cordelia's writings became increasingly bizarre and disconnected from reality. Prison censors who reviewed her correspondence noted elaborate fantasies about escape plans involving magical creatures, detailed descriptions of conversations with deceased relatives, and intricate conspiracy theories about her imprisonment. These documents would later become valuable to medical researchers studying the effects of prolonged isolation on mental health. A turning point came when Father Benedict collapsed during one of his visits to Cordelia's cell. The elderly chaplain, who had shown nothing but kindness to the prisoner throughout her incarceration, suffered what appeared to be a heart attack after witnessing one of her most violent episodes. As he was carried from the prison, he whispered to Commander Thorne that no human being should be allowed to suffer as Cordelia was suffering. This incident prompted Queen Isabella to make an unprecedented decision. For the first time since Cordelia's imprisonment, the Queen decided to visit the tower personally to assess the situation. The announcement of this royal visit sent shockwaves through the kingdom, as monarchs traditionally avoided any contact with condemned prisoners to maintain the dignity and distance appropriate to their station. The Queen's visit to the Tower of Valdoria on a cold winter morning marked the beginning of the final chapter in Lady Cordelia's tragic story.
Accompanied by Commander Thorne, Dr.
Hartwell, and a small security detail, Queen Isabella entered the prison with the weight of 3 years of consequences pressing upon her shoulders. When the Queen approached Cordelia's cell, the prisoner initially cowered in fear, apparently not recognizing her visitor. However, as Isabella spoke gently to her former friend, moments of clarity seemed to break through the madness. Cordelia suddenly fell to her knees, weeping and begging forgiveness, while admitting the magnitude of her crimes and the justice of her punishment. This emotional encounter lasted only a few minutes before Cordelia retreated back into her delusional state, but it was enough to convince Queen Isabella that mercy was now not only appropriate but necessary. The woman in the cell bore no resemblance to the proud, ambitious lady who had once graced the royal court. Justice had been served, but continued imprisonment would serve only to compound tragedy with cruelty. The final resolution of Lady Cordelia's case would reshape the kingdom's approach to justice, mental health, and the balance between punishment and compassion in royal governance.